expecting from that. And then I'm going to share some available resources. There's a lot out there, a lot of communities that are getting together so that they can share some of their knowledge with other security professionals, auditors, legal folks, and whatnot, and then where to start. So if we look at the NIST definition, there are three different models that are out there. There's an infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And it could be delivered in many different ways, whether it's a private cloud, a public cloud, or a hybrid. From my experience, I'm going to be sharing more of my experience based on software as a service on the public side. Now, cloud, the term cloud came out early last year, maybe the year before, and people's response was, oh no, what is it? What does it mean? And then it gradually changed towards, oh, there's security issues with it. Why in the world would anybody want to go in that direction? So in 2008, a survey was done by IDC, and IDC asked the question, rate the challenges and issues ascribed to cloud or on-demand services. And they rated security as the #1 concern that people have. But then what does that really mean? Is it the technical security side? Does the cloud cannot meet the security requirements of everybody? Or is it just give up, don't even worry about going to the cloud? Another survey came out by Information Week earlier this year, February, and it reached out to 519 business technology professionals. And they listed security as still the #1 concern for not going or using cloud services. 77% though said there's a huge cost savings if we do decide to go in that direction. So again, security is another concern, but people don't really know what that meant. There was a few slides that talk about security incidents. One of them was the Google attack. And in Google, they said in mid-December, they had a targeted, sophisticated attack against their corporate network. Not on their services that they offer out to the world, but on their corporate network. So a lot of articles came out after this. A lot of security professionals cited it was a security issue against the cloud. Other security professionals said it was the result of one vulnerability, and that vulnerability was either Internet Explorer or Adobe. And there's one article that I actually came across, a report from ISEC Partners. And ISEC Partners actually lists, here are the things that could have happened or how it happened. As a matter of fact, Alex Estamos' presentation yesterday hinted on that. He said that the attack was actually an attack on an employee. And that employee was the one that allowed that individual to get into the corporate network. And once that individual was in, they escalated their privileges and found other means to connect to other resources within Google. Now, part of that report that ISEC has highlighted 4 things, which I thought was interesting. He said attackers are ignoring the front door and trying to find those employees that would respond to any malware downloads or Facebook links or anything like that. So the employees are the ones that are actually allowing a lot of these attacks from getting in. The other thing that he noted was current antivirus solutions are not working. And one of the reasons why these are not working is because attackers are actually taking the malware, modifying it, and testing it against the antivirus to see if the antivirus is going to detect it. If it doesn't, great. That's a good malware for them to use. Another one that he noted was patching sometimes is not enough because a lot of the exploits were targeted on zero-day exploits. And the last one is you might be playing in the big leagues. So from the small mom-and-pop shops all the way up to Google's to the Microsoft of the world. I spoke to a few companies, their IT department. They didn't have a lot of security folks there. And I asked them, are you looking into your environment to see if you've been attacked, or do you have anything in place that would help you to detect something like this? And their response was, well, I don't see why we would have to do it. I mean, the attacks are focused on Google, most likely going to be on eBay's or Microsoft. We don't have anything interesting to these attackers for them to attack us. And that's pretty scary. I think the other part of that is they didn't know how to detect or look into that. And so that's why communities are getting together and putting or sharing information, such as ISEC's report. And by the way, ISEC's report is available online. That can be downloaded. The link is at the bottom of the page. So when I look at security, running a security program for a service provider, not only do I have to worry about implementing the right controls for the company, the policies, awareness presentations, you name it, just whatever goes into a standard security implementation. I also have to worry about some of the concerns that our users are taking to bypass IT and security. One of the business units back in 2004 came to the IT department and said, look, we want to use this online service as on-demand service. The IT team responded back with, we can build it for you. Just give us a year and a half, give us the right amount of budget, and we'll be able to put it in place. And the business unit said, yeah, we're going to wait for that. And because they have a credit card and signing authority, they went around the IT department and the security and decided to go on and do it themselves. Another experience I had, I was actually sitting down in a meeting room with the product team. And the product team said, Randy, we need to go through this presentation on what we're introducing out to the market. Let me go get it. So he got onto his computer, logged onto Google Share, and when he opened it up on the screen, you can see all the other documents that he saved on there with titles that would lead me to believe that those are sensitive documents. This is back in 2004, 2005 timeframe. So it was pretty scary to see that they're actually doing that. I had to sit down with him and that person's manager and go through the process of why thou, shall not do this. What was funny about that was we were sitting down there and he started making this list. And at the end of the meeting, I said, what is that list for? And he goes, here are the names of all the other employees in this company that are doing the same exact thing that I'm doing. And if you're going to, get me for this, you better go and talk to all these other people and do the same thing to them. So there was a lot more employees out there. So that raised another concern. And the concern was, how do we get in front of this? How do we get in front of all these employees that are making decisions to use the cloud and not have to get authority or get approval for that? And we came up with, well, we have to do a better job in managing risk. And when I say we, it's no longer the security team, it's no longer the IT team, it's now the individuals of the company that have to be able to manage the risk better. And the only way we can do that is through policy and awareness and hope that works. It's not going to work completely, but we're hoping that that'll work. And that's still true, that still holds true today. Other companies, what they ended up doing, blocking access to certain sites, not allowing people to bring in certain devices or having a policy that says you can't bring in certain devices. Then iPhones came out, now iPads, all these different devices that allow people to connect on Facebook without even having to connect onto the network. Some employees figured out what the username and password is to connect onto the Wi-Fi. It just gets harder and harder to block a lot of these connections out to social media sites or cloud services. Now, when I look at security, when I first started in software as a service, I think some of you will find this entertaining. I was working for WebEx, and WebEx actually hired me because there was a defacement, a web page defacement. And if some of you are familiar with WebEx, the way WebEx works is you have the company name .webex.com. And at the time we had about close to 1,000 customers worldwide. This made it on the public news, so this is all public, and you can do a search on it on Google. And the page was defaced to fuck the USA government. That's what it said, every single page. We had to tell the team to turn it off, close it out, and then we'll go in and fix it. So we started fixing it, or replacing the web page back from backup. And the pages started coming back again. The defacement started coming back in again. We didn't understand what it was that was doing it. Finally, we figured out that it was a vulnerability that was being exploited on the Windows system that we had to update or patch for. And the patching took some time because there were some dependencies. So all in all, it was about 48 hours that the site was down. A lot of customers were upset. One or two maybe left, but some of them continued to stay. And what was interesting about that is that a lot of the customers decided to stay because they didn't have any other company out there that they can go to that does something similar. They just stayed with us. And they were happy with the way we implemented the change. So also looking at some of the other interesting parts about running a security program when I first started as a service provider, the company didn't want me to touch any of the product side. They said, Randy, I know you know security, but I don't want you touching any of the product side. We don't want to hear any recommendations from your team. And so I felt, well, why not? And they said, well, any security features that you put in may break our product. Our customers are not going to like that. If our customers are not going to like it, they're not going to buy it. And then we're going to have to cut costs. And the best way to cut costs is cut people. Would you want to be cut? And so there wasn't really much choice that we had. And the other item that I've started to notice out there was a lot of the response to our customers who are interested in our security program and want to learn more about our security posture. The service provider said, no, we're not going to share any sensitive documents with you. Any confidential documents we have, like our policies, our network diagram, is not something we're going to send out to you. Trust us on our security posture. We know what we're doing. We have a security guy, reports to the CEO or the executive team. Just don't worry about it. And I think a lot of those customers felt, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to do it. I realized that the cost savings leads us to move into this service provider. But what can I do? I don't have any other competitors out there today to go to and demand that from them. So there really wasn't any transparency. Now, moving over the years as it passed by, more and more competitors started showing up. Customers now have choices to go to. And if they have one demand that they couldn't go to one provider, they'll bring it over to another provider who would want to win that customer. So that led towards another change in security. Customers have options. Now, the product managers, sales team, other departments in the company said, Randy, we need your help. We need to get ahead of this. We want to prevent some of our customers from having to go to our customers. What additional security controls can we put in place to make these customers happier? So now we're reviewed as an enabler for the business, which was an interesting change. And the comment that we, or the decision that we left with was, we need to raise the comfort of our customers. We need to make sure that they're comfortable in using our service. And to get them comfortable, the biggest thing that they have to look for is, how do we provide the information that they're looking for? How do we implement the controls that they need in order to use the service? And that led towards more transparency. Let them see the policies. We won't give it to them, but go online, have a WebEx session, look at the policies and see if they're comfortable with it. If they're local, stop on by and have a look at the policies. And that allowed for us to provide more transparency. The other item that I started to notice was that there was a lot more collaboration, not just within the service provider, but also between the cloud users and the cloud service providers. And they were working together to say, look, here's how you can improve security of your product. Now, with the security transitions, there was a lot of lessons learned. I shared the defacement of that one company I used to work for. Customers were impacted by that. Not only were the customers impacted by that, so were the operations people in the service provider, the IT department, the executive team. They remembered that incident. They don't want that to happen again. Customers experience outages, availability outages, whether it's a fiber line cut or an employee within the service provider wanting to do a good thing and accidentally shutting down the Oracle database and causing a huge outage. So there's a lot of lessons that was learned over the years, and a lot of that made it into a form of questionnaires. Questionnaires are sent over to the service providers to say, you need to fill this out and respond back. And the response back usually comes back with additional questions from the customers. But as the company continued to grow, like all the companies I worked for, so did the amount of questionnaires. And the questionnaires weren't the same. There's not one standard questionnaire that were sent out. And finally, requests for evidence continue to grow. We want to see logs. We want to see you changing the root passwords. We want to see the data center that you say the data resides in. Now, every time I say you, it's you, the security program. So earlier I mentioned that working for a service provider, there was a lot of things that I had to be responsible for, including building the security program to protect our company. Then there's external factors that came into this, and that's all of these customer requirements that come in. Questionnaires that would come in and say, we need for you to fill out this list of 200 questions. We would fill it out and send it back to the customer. The customer would say, we don't understand your response. And the reason why they didn't respond or understand the response is because a lot of these questions weren't clear. Some of the questions could be applicable to the internal controls of our company or the controls that we place in our production environment. So the rule of thumb in my company, and I talk to some of my peers about this, and they do the same thing, they respond with just the production side controls, thinking that's what they're more interested in. And that's what creates a lot of confusion. So when the customer says, okay, let's go ahead and sit down and understand this a little bit better, and if they're comfortable with it, then they almost take it to the next level, which is, let's come on site to do a review. Reviews sometimes last half an hour, could last 3 days. And sometimes they'll have an external review, whether it's a pen tester, Ernst & Young, or another company that they're familiar with to come in and do the work. Now here's another interesting one, which I came across in 2004. I had a customer, a life science organization, that said, Randy, you need to follow the FDA requirements. And I said, well, what FDA are you referring to? And they said, you need to follow the FDA 21 CFR Part 11. And I said, well, we don't handle electronic signature in our environment, so we don't need to comply. And the individual said, look, I have a checkbox here in my list that says any third party that does business with us have to get FDA 21. So we went out and we looked for a company that did it, and it cost about well over $300,000 to get it done. So I went back to the salesperson. I said, look, if you want this company to be our customer, you're going to have to come up with a budget to help us get through this. So a 2-week engagement, 2 people visiting 2 different sites. A final report came out by this auditor, and one of the things he decided to add, which was out of the norm, was a 1-pager at the very top of that page, and it said, based on my review of this company or this service provider, they are not required to follow FDA 21 CFR Part 11. So we took that report in a conference room, gave it to that person. He opened it to the first page, read the 3-line paragraph, closed it, and he said, good, we're done. You guys, we can start using your service. And it was just amazing. We have to go through all that process just to get them to sign off on the checkbox. Now, while we're getting all of that requirements from the outside, we have to do a lot of other things at the very top. Staffing resources was an issue. I had a team that's focused on building a security program for the company, protecting the company. But I had all these questionnaires that were coming in and on-site reviews that I have to reallocate resources to and have them manage a lot of our customers. Security budgets, similar to that FDA requirement that our customer has. I've had a lot of customers come in and say you need to be HIPAA compliant, or you need to follow DICAP, BITSCAP, or you need to pursue common criteria, EAL4. The list goes on and on. And some of those cases, we don't do it. And that moves over to the third part of some of the job that we have to do, and that's reducing confusion. And we have to go in and educate some of our customers on why it is that we don't have to comply. And also take that into account and go into the executive team or the sales team within the company and do the same thing. Some of the salespeople, I hate to hit salespeople too hard here, but some of the salespeople are really focused on getting the business, getting it in. I don't care how it gets done. If it's just a small audit that's worth $100,000, this company is going to be able to generate several $100,000 for us, so it's a loss. But I don't want to get into the habit of having to do this every single year. So there's a lot of work that goes into reducing that confusion. Now, taking a step back, Gartner had a survey, and they surveyed a bunch of CIOs. And with the CIOs, they asked them, what are your strategies for 2010 and 2013? And there were 2 things that came out of that survey that seemed to match up with each other in those 2 different years. The CIOs want to link business and IT strategies and plans. And the other thing that they wanted to do is they want to deliver projects and enable business growth. Another part of that survey was, well, how do you see yourself getting there? What are the technology drivers to allow you to get there? And they ranked 3 things: cloud computing, Web 2.0, and virtualization. So even though there's a lot of discussions that security is the main driver for not moving into the cloud, there is a lot of push to move in that direction, especially at the CIO level. So now the question becomes, is the cloud ready for you? Oh, sorry, before I do that, let me go back here. Another survey out of this was sent out to 359 companies. 86%, well, the question was, are you ready for moving into the cloud, and do you have a process to evaluate third parties' security posture? And out of 359 companies, 86% claim that they have a process for evaluating it. 62% said, yes, we do, and the way we do is we send a questionnaire. That was it. Once we get the response back, we're comfortable with it. 54% said, yes, we do, but we also do an on-site review. So there's a lot of companies out there that rely on questionnaires, but then there's also that 14% that doesn't have anything at all. So when the question comes out, is the cloud ready for you? a lot of companies really don't take the next step, which is determining business needs and so forth. A lot of companies just either push to the cloud or don't move to the cloud, citing security issues. So determining the business need, I think, is one of the most important things, one of the most important steps to take. The other one is, will the cloud provider be around? There's a lot of cloud providers out there today, and I think a couple of them I've noticed already are no longer in business. The concern there is what happens to the data when they go away? Where is it going to reside? Who gets to own it? Will you be able to go after it? Another question that the cloud users should be asking themselves is, what data will be stored? Where will it be stored? And once you have that information, go into your business unit and say, here's the classification at our company that we've assigned to this data. Most companies that I talk to today don't have classification down to that point. So some companies usually have to go through that process and really saying, here's the classification I would assign to this data. Then take that and go to the provider and say, what type of controls do you put in place for the data if it were to reside on your site? If it matches, that's a good comfort feeling. I'd like to see better. So there are companies out there that actually does it a little bit better as far as controls are concerned. Another question is, who's responsible for security? If the service provider says us, that's the wrong answer. The responsibility is both sides. The cloud user should have some visibility into implementing certain security controls, and part of that includes going on site and performing a review or requiring certain controls to be put in place. Are there third-party validations that the service provider went through that can give you some level of comfort? And there's different ways to gain comfort, whether it's a trusted third party or if they decided to hire their cousin to perform an audit against their environment, probably wouldn't be a good report. Will they allow for you to have a right to audit embedded in the agreement? Will they let you go out and audit? Are they going to limit on what you can audit against? The other question that you should ask for them is, do you have a process for removing data? What about incident response? Are you, as a cloud user, included as part of that incident response? And then finally, how often do you need to review that service provider based on all this information? Now, this isn't meant to be the all-inclusive list of things you should be asking for. There are organizations out there, like the Cloud Security Alliance, that's done a lot of great work in building a guide. And that guide will help a lot of cloud users and service providers to determine what type of controls we should consider. Another association that's out there is ANISA. Alex Stamos yesterday in his presentation mentioned ANISA. ANISA has a document that covers security benefits of the cloud as well as the risks. And they can make recommendations on risks and also how do you maximize the benefits of actually using a cloud. Another association that I like is the shared assessments, if some of you are familiar with that. They have a target data tracker. I'll cover that in another slide. They have a self-information gathering, which I just said, this is awesome, when I worked over at Yodlee. And the reason why it was awesome is because, not just because there's 2,000 questions that I had to fill out, but when a customer comes in or a prospective customer says, Randy, we want to use your service, here's our questionnaire, can you go answer that? My response is, I have a SIG. Can you accept the SIG instead of me having to fill out the questionnaires? And for the most part, those customers recognize the SIG and allow for that to be accepted as part of that process. There's also another report that complements the SIG, and that's called the AUP. It's an agreed upon procedure. Shared Assessments came up with a list of controls that a third party, a trusted third party, would have to go in and audit against it. The report's given to the service provider. The service provider can choose to give it to the customer. So AUP complements the self-information gathering SIG. Other tools that are available on Shared Assessment, there's the business continuity questions. It's a list of questions that you don't have to come up with. You can just take that and send it out to the service provider and see if they can respond back to that. Privacy questions, where their data resides, or personally identifiable, and how it's protected. And they're coming up with some pretty awesome tools as well. Jericho Forum. Is anybody familiar with Jericho Forum? So Jericho Forum has been around for some time, and I think they were one of the first ones to talk about deperiodization of the network. But they also came up with a cloud cube model, which I thought was interesting. And it's a way to tell whether or not you're ready for the cloud on the private side or on the public side. So it's a pretty decent read. Another one that they came out with this year is the self-assessment document, and I'll touch on that in one slide. So if we take, for example, the target data tracker, I actually took a snapshot off of the target data tracker and send this over to your service provider that you're interested in leveraging their services. One of the questions that you should be asking yourself is, do I know this provider? By having them fill this out, it'll allow for you to have more visibility into their environment. You want to ask them what data resides in their environment. The cloud provider should know what data resides in there. If they don't know, it's a very good chance that they may not be the right solution for you. Now, I know that cloud, I remember going to Google and I said, Google, can you tell us what type of data is stored and where it's stored? And Google said, no, we can't tell you where it's stored. We can tell you where it's not stored, was the response. And another question that I asked is, well, can I see the SAS 70 report? And their response is, we can give you a document that says we did the SAS 70 report, but we will not give you the SAS 70 report. So I'm not sure the practice or the approach that they took, and still don't understand the decision behind that. But from what I understand, that's the approach that Google takes. A lot of other service providers take a different approach, which is we need to be a lot more transparent about this. So let's provide that information out to them. So this document asks what data will be stored and verify this internally with your business team to confirm that it actually is the data that should be stored out there. You may end up finding out that none of the data or only parts of the data need to be stored online. Another question you should be asking is requests for the locations. This is important. Sometimes the service provider would just respond back with their data centers, and they won't respond back with their corporate office that allows for some employees to connect into the production environment, or their operations team that might be that might reside in China or another country, or even the operations team that could be spread globally around the world. Get to know what data center, what facility actually touches your data, and have them listed on this Excel spreadsheet. This will give you a better idea of what you're working with. And then also ask them to describe a very high level view of what type of controls that they set aside for that, for those facilities. Now, how do you verify? Well, you can either leverage the SIG and have them fill that out. You can actually send that over to them and ask them to fill it out. It's 2,000 questions long. Or you can target your own questionnaire. And what I mean by targeting your questionnaire, make sure you identify that the questions you're asking are specific to internal or external controls. Earlier I mentioned that some of the security questions that I received in the past weren't clear on whether or not they want an internal response or a production response, and I would always respond with production. And that causes a lot of confusion. Then for the no and not applicable, make sure that they have comments associated with it so that you can get a better feel for what it is that they're trying to tell you. Now, Jericho Forum came up with assessment. This is a self-assessment that they introduced, I think, in March. And this allows for service provider to rate themselves on whether or not they meet some of the security control objectives. The idea behind here is that you can post this Jericho self-assessment on Jericho's website. And if that service provider has a lot of customers that look at that and say, no, that's all wrong, that's not true, they can either go back to Jericho Forum or go back directly to the service provider and tell them to correct it. Now, the only reason why I brought this up is that this is interesting. This is one of the first steps that we're seeing out there. And a lot of other associations are trying to figure out ways to come up with continuous assessment for service providers. This is one of the first ones. I'm not saying that this is the right one. It might be. Maybe later down the road they'll change this to make it look like something else that a lot more people would accept it. So there are other options that you can use to gain more trust on the cloud provider, such as continuing to use your own questionnaires. Now, what I've noticed in my past 10 years running a service provider or working in a service provider, the only time that I receive a questionnaire is the first time a customer is interested in using our service. For the most part, not a lot of companies come back and say, we need for you to update that questionnaire. It's very, very rare that I see a lot of customers do that. The on-site review. If a customer wants to do an on-site review, similar to the questionnaire, they only do it once. It's very rare that I see companies come out and do another on-site review. And if they do, it's usually done once a year. There's the ISO 2700, another certification that you can go for, but it's done, again, maybe once a year. The SAS 70 Type 2. Now, SAS 70 Type 2, I'm sure everybody has heard, there's different or mixed emotions about this. A SAS 70 Type 2 was really meant to evaluate the process of a company. It wasn't really meant to drive down to the technical side of the security practice, and I think that's one of the drawbacks. But the other one is that the service provider can control what it is that can be written into the report. Some companies, like one company I used to work for, what we decided to do was we took all of the control objectives from ISO 17799, put it in the SAS 70, and then asked our third party to audit us against those controls. And then they would report on that, which I felt was a fairly strong report that we can give to our customers. And a lot of our customers relied on that. There's also the international version of SAS 70, the ISAE 3402 that just came out too. There's also SysTrust. SysTrust is just a seal that resides on your web page, and there's 5 different principles, and one of them is security. It doesn't give a report. It just says, here are the controls that they're supposed to adhere to, and they pass. PCI, if they're a service provider level 1, posted on Visa and MasterCard site, that might give you a better idea of what control objectives might be placed in that company. Doesn't mean that it's actually in place. Third-party pen test is another interesting one. If they provide a report on this, great. Now, what I would like to see in the report is not just a network pen test, but also a NAPSEC pen test, an assisted source code pen test, and a review against what they believe to be is good, bad, or indifferent. And the last thing I also want to note here is emerging cloud certification and assessments. Earlier this week, Dov and Chris talked a little about this as well. CSA is moving towards figuring out how we're going to be able to standardize on certification and assessments in the service provider. We've reached out to shared assessments. I believe there's a meeting coming up with Bank of America to talk about that. There's also another association called the Common Assurance Maturity Model based out in Europe. They had their 6th or 7th meeting so far, and they're looking to do the same thing. The Common Assurance Maturity Model is working with CSA as well as shared assessment. And what I'm hoping that'll come out of this, by having all 3 of those or 4 of those associations working together, that a standard would come out on how to perform a review, how to perform an assessment, and how to perform a certification for those service providers. The other thing I want to leave you with on this slide is I wouldn't rely on just one item off of here to get that comfort of a service provider. I would rely on multiple of these items. There's just no way that I'm going to say, okay, I trust your SAS 70 Type 2 and not do a pen test, for example. Because there's a lot of areas that's not covered in a SAS 70 that may be covered in some of these other reports. So moving forward, where do I think that we're going to be headed? Well, service provider security is going to continue to mature. And the reason why it's going to mature is that a lot more users are going to come out there and demand or put in requirements that the service provider need to have in place so that the users feel a lot more comfortable using their service. Continuous assessment is the one item that I think we really need out there. And the reason why I say continuous assessment is that there's a lot of controls that companies need to implement. For example, 90-day password change rotation, reviewing your logs weekly, reviewing your firewall rules, and just going down the list. A lot of that happen either weekly, monthly, quarterly, but we don't see that. The only time we see that is in that annual review that they give back to us. So if there's a vendor, a process, or a new guide that would allow service provider to do that, that would really help, and I think it would lead more towards transparency. Philippe Courteau, our CEO at Qualys, mentioned this a number of different times in his presentation. And one of the reasons why I enjoy working at Qualys, because he sees that there's not one security vendor out there today that can be the end-all, be-all of security for companies. There's just no way. We're going to have vendor cooperation. There's going to be some integration between vendors that may be competing in certain markets. But the only way to provide a good protection for a lot of our customers, or better protection for our customers, is to look for that cooperation and potential integration. The other things he also mentioned was tight collaboration with other vendors, with other service providers, cloud users, and also community. There's going to be a lot more communities similar to that of the Cloud Security Alliance, the EMISA, Jericho Forum, the CAMs, that are going to work together to help provide information to security folks or auditors or CIOs, and the list goes on. So the last slide I have here is just a list of links if you're interested to look into this, and feel free to ask me any questions about any one of these. So I'll leave it here and open up to any questions.
You have covered a very broad range of service providers in your characterization of cloud, ranging from, small folks where you might have some leverage all the way up to Google or Amazon. I've read the SLA from Amazon, Chris Hall, is putting off, and please put Google's off. We have no leverage with those folks. It's your data is your responsibility, member state. I'm not sure what point we can make by sending them a questionnaire.
No, they won't accept the questionnaire.
Right.
So Google will not accept the questionnaire.
And with regard to Amazon, if you even start a print test, they will just shut you down and then that's simple.
Yeah.
So I guess, there's a level of provider, because I'm actually dealing with one right now for a learning management system, that I really wouldn't consider a cloud provider. It's really just a software as a service host. And we had some leverage with them. So we received it. SAS 7 can we come visit your data center? We asked for some backup and hot backup and disaster recovery, but I don't really think of those people as cloud providers. So, we've obviously chosen this broad definition for a reason.
Yeah, so early on in the slide, I mentioned the three different models. And the top model is software as a service on the public side. And I shared that that's what my focus is going to be on in this presentation. So my focus is, my career has been all focused on software as a service on the public side. And what it takes to implement controls for our customers and satisfy their needs to use our service. So I do understand that there's a lot of companies out there, Google definitely one of them, that don't want to share their information. And I think going back to where it was at in 2000, when a user wanted to use a cloud service, there wasn't a lot of other competitors out there. They just had to accept the fact that the company will not do certain things for you if you wanted or requesting for something. And it seems like that's the case with Google and Amazon. But there are companies out there today that are going to come out and say, look, we're going to start competing against the Googles and the Amazon, and we're going to allow for some of these customers to do what they want to do. And some of the companies that won't do that are most likely going to fall to the wayside or may not last long. I'm hoping Google will start changing their practice a little bit. None, really. Not right now. Maybe Google will get broken up. Is that what you're saying? questionnaires.
Questionnaires.
So
I really hope I don't have anything sending me 2,000 questionnaires. I want in a couple of minutes to go through those 2,000 questions and figure out the ones they want me to answer.
and that's how Salesforce actually does it. They have a book, and when an auditor wants to review them, they say, "Come on site. Here's the book. When you're finished with it, if you have any other questions." Yeah, sometimes that's true. Yeah. Now, here's another interesting point. I talked about competitors that might be doing the same thing, and people might go to them. Cisco WebEx Mail is coming out with one that does something similar, which I don't know if it's in direct relation to what Google is doing or what, but if you go to Cisco's website and do a search on Cisco WebEx Mail, it'll show that they're offering WebEx services online, as well as document share and all that other fun stuff. So, and being at WebEx and talking to those guys they still go through the security process, allow for audits to occur and share information. So that might be the driver for other companies to start following the same thing.
Google does have one thing that does pass done, which is an absolute perpetual money machine based on click ad revenue.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm told it's like 18 years pulling out 10 or 15 times a day for cash. Who knows that much money? So I would be curious to maybe know. You know, many Google Cloud services are just free. You know, Gmail, of course, all that stuff. And do you know what percentage of revenue is paid for cloud services like Apple? I bet it's not a lot.
Don't know. Be an interesting look.
Same thing about Amazon. Obviously, they were just we might be looking at channel. We're building all this stuff.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, the AICPA.
Yeah, they actually point you to this trust when you're talking about IT security.
Yeah, so SysTrust has 5 different principles in there, and one of them is IT, the other one security, the other one privacy. So it's up to you to determine which one you want to go after. The only problem with SysTrust is if you're a global company, I've seen this happen before. We've tried to present this to companies in Europe, and they respond back saying they have a problem with the first word of AICPA, and that's American. They don't trust it. So I got rid of the SysTrust on this one company I worked for back in 2005 because nobody really relied on it. But combining the ISO 17799 controls into the SAS 70 made it a lot easier for them to review and accept, instead of actually going after the certification. You're welcome. Any other questions?